Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is day six for WiDS Mysuru. I am super happy to be a part of this community, and I'd like to thank Osha firstly for giving me an opportunity to be a speaker today. Um, I'm Julian Zara Joseph. I have done my computer science engineering from Monash College, and I passed out in 2016. I've been working as a full stack developer for the past 4 years in fact analytics, and since 2018, I've been a WIDS ambassador for Mumbai. So pretty excited to join one more city, and I've also been a Grace Hopper's student scholar all the way in college in 2015, and I think it just goes about to show how I love being a part of groups and communities that celebrate women in technology, regardless of where they are from, who they are. And we love it when young girls join us for such workshops and events. So, thank you for joining us today. Hope you enjoy our talks. And I also love reading books and sketching. That's it about me. Let's get started with our topic for today. It is one of the introductory topics for data science, one of my favorite topics from statistics, and I hope it's yours as well. This is the agenda for today. You have the introduction, basic jargons that are a must for hypothesis testing, the steps for hypothesis, examples of mean and proportion, and other tests. So, hypothesis testing is made use of in every single field, regardless of their complexity or their simplicity. You might have it in sports analytics, like for example, ESPN might be having hypotheses being tested, such as which cloth material for the uniform suits better, or which player is actually going to perform better in such and such weather condition, or it might be stocks. Which day of the week is better for what kind of stocks, or tourism, you name it, it is being used everywhere. In fact, we ourselves as humans have a lot of assumptions that we keep testing out on a day to day basis. For example, we assume gravity still works. If I drop something right now, it would still be attracted. If I take the flight of stairs right now, I assume there's a flight of stairs to take. So these assumptions are what is called hypothesis, and you definitely need a competing hypothesis for this testing to happen. So the foundation is laid by making sure you have two of these: the null hypothesis, that is called the H naught, or the alternative hypothesis, which is usually denoted as HA or H1. And it is this alternative hypothesis that we focus on. It is also known as the research hypothesis. And as long as we don't have enough evidence, we assume that this null hypothesis is what is true. When we get enough evidence, like for example, we have these gut feelings. Say, for example, there could be a hypothesis that all the average height of an Indian woman is 5 feet. Now, statisticians might gather data to disprove or to make sure that you have data enough to either continue assuming that the null hypothesis is true, or you might have that no, there are women who are shorter, or a majority of women are taller than 5 feet. So that is a basic introduction to hypothesis testing. Let's take one of our trending examples currently, where we have a null hypothesis saying Ria is innocent, or an alternative hypothesis saying Ria is guilty. And we definitely want, we a lot of us want that the alternative hypothesis comes true or not. But whatever it is, the final jury's decision would be either of these. You would either reject the null hypothesis, or you would fail to reject the null hypothesis. So there is no accepting the null hypothesis. You would only fail to collect enough evidence against the null hypothesis. So in this logic of hypothesis testing, we don't know what is the reality. We don't know whether Ria is innocent or Ria is guilty. So whatever be the reality, whether H naught is true or H naught is false, the correct decision would be when we reject the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is false, and when we fail to reject the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is true. So this would be the only two scenarios when we have a correct decision being made. So, what happens when we make the wrong decision? When we make the wrong decision, this is when we have a scenario called the type 1 error. That is, even though the null hypothesis is true, we have rejected the null hypothesis. Or even though the null hypothesis is false, we have failed to reject the null hypothesis. And this is called the type 1 error and the type 2 error. So please be really clear about these concepts because this is what our foundation is definitely going to help us in the coming slides. Now, the probability of committing that type 1 error is also known as the significance level, or it is also known as alpha. Now, this alpha is usually decided before we go ahead and perform the hypothesis testing. Now, beta is called the probability for committing the second error, the type 2 error, and par is going to be the difference between 1 minus beta. The p-value here is going to be defined as, it's another jargon, but it is usually confused by people. So let me just make it really clear. It is a probability of a sample statistic. We'll come to what that can be. That is, for now, call it whatever that sample statistic is. Uh, provided that we have assumed, provided that the null hypothesis is true. So this will be clear when we actually move forward. But uh, just okay, let's wait for the examples to come up. But when we have this probability in hand, what we use it for is comparison between the alpha and the p-value. This probability is compared with the alpha. If it is less than the alpha, that is the level of significance, then we reject the null hypothesis. Or if the p-value is greater than or equal to alpha, we fail to reject the null hypothesis. Uh, so these are the 6 steps. It can actually be just 4, but just to make it really clear, I've broken it down to 6 steps. That is, we first set the null hypothesis and the alternate hypothesis. We check that the conditions are correct. We then decide on a significance level. This is the alpha. This is our tolerance level for the type 1 error. How much or what is the size of type 1 error that we can actually accept? Then we come and we sit and calculate the test statistic, and that test statistic is what is going to be placed inside this. We'll come to define what test statistic is. So once we have done that, we then calculate the probability, that is this p-value, like I mentioned. Or there is a second approach called the rejection region approach. I'll explain that as well. Then there is a decision that is made based on this. So supposing you found the p-value, then you can make a decision based on this and then finally conclude. So let's take an example. Say, for example, we have a national employment rate being detected as 0.08, and we have a small town, say it's a small town like Mysuru, and your mayor is trying to prove that the unemployment rate of Mysuru is not the same as that of the national unemployment rate, that is 0.08. So null hypothesis here would be the proportion. Here it is not the mean, it is the proportion. That is, p is equal to 0.08. This is the null hypothesis, and the alternate is that it is not equal to. Our level of significance that we have set here is 0.05. So what your mayor does is, your mayor goes and picks up a small sample of 200. Definitely there are more than 200 people living in Mysore. So let's assume that it's less than 10% of the population. And the sample statistic for here, it is the proportion. P is going to be equal to, after having collected the data, out of those 200 people, only 22 people are unemployed. And that gives us a proportion of 0.11. Assuming that the null hypothesis is true, what would be the probability of getting a result that is far away from 0.08? That is the assumed population's proportion. So that probability would be the p-value. So how do you find this p-value? You would actually go about finding out what is that how many standard deviations away from the assumed population proportion is this new value. So if you have 0.08 at the very center, how many standard deviations away is it from that? So for this, we make use of the the test statistic called Z. We'll be making use of the Z table here. So just for a very quick introduction, here we have this formula which is being used. There's a way to prove all of this, and you'll definitely find enough material for this, or you can reach out to me for the material. proportion, that is a sample, the proportion for that particular sample minus the particular national level unemployment rate that you have, the population proportion, divided by the square root of the product of this, the population proportion into 1 minus the population proportion. So you can see I've done 1 minus 0.08 divided by 200. Now when you do this calculation, you get 1.56. So here what we need to do is find the value of this 1.56 in the z table, and that will give you the probability of. So here you can see I'm trying to find the probability that the z value is greater than or equal to 1.56. So that value, whatever that value comes up to here is, that is 0.059, we compare this value to alpha. And this alpha is our level of significance. If you have this value to be same as less than alpha, then you reject the null hypothesis or and accept the alternative hypothesis, or if it's greater than or equal to, you fail to reject. So just for people who've never seen a z-table, this is what it looks like. We have all of the probability mapped to be lying below z. So if you have 1.56, we might actually find its symmetrical value minus 1.56. That value is going to be used. Now for proportion, you could have either, you could have, we were looking for, currently this is where our example fell, the first column, where p is not equal to p naught, and it could also be, and that's why it could be a two-tailed uh, graph. I'll show you the graph later on, but it could also be that I'm saying that the unemployment rate in Mysuru is higher than the national value. So that could be p is greater than p0, or it could be lower, and that's p is less than p0. That is the alternative, different types of alternative hypothesis that we can make. And based on that, it could be called the right tail test, the left tail test, or the two tail test. For mean, it is similar. The p is replaced by mu. Uh, so let's take another example. So we've all been attending WiDS Mysuru events, right? And when it was an offline event, I'm sure everybody in and around Bangalore, everyone would come and attend the event in person. But now that it is online and you can view it on YouTube, how many of us are actually attending it from Mysore? So what is the majority, and are the majority of attendees from the state of Karnataka? So if this is our question, what would be our response variable? Here, state is the state of Karnataka, so it's a qualitative variable, it's a categorical data. And our parameter of interest, again here with the population proportion of attendees. Again, I've taken this proportion. And when we say majority, your p-value is definitely going to be more than 50%. So not p-value, sorry, the p naught. So p naught is going to be 0.5, and the majority also implies that it has to be greater than p naught. So your alternate hypothesis is going to be p is greater than 0.5. So it's a right tail test. Okay. Now, for example, let's take another example. Supposing I've created a website. Okay, if you go to the registration website where you've Eventbrite was a registration website, right? It had a white background. Supposing I want to change the background from white to yellow, and I try to gather data for what is the mean visit time of the users who reach Eventbrite. Okay, so here, for example, mean was 20 minutes. I have a null hypothesis that says even though I've made the change of white of the background color from white to yellow, the mean time would not change. And the alternate hypothesis is that the mean time would be greater than 20, because that's what is going to drive more business. Now, the significance level, or the amount of type 1 error that we can accept, is going to be 0.05. This is usually the standard, 0.05 is usually standard, but it can vary from 0.1 to 0.001. It'll vary. So based on your question here, it will keep varying. But you have to decide this before you begin. Now we've taken a sample of say 100 people who visit the yellow website and who visit the yellow website, and we try to find what is their sample mean time, their sample standard deviation time, and we end up finding, for example, that the mean is going to be equal to 25 minutes. So what is our next step? We now have to find out what is the probability that the mean is going to be greater than 25 minutes, assuming or provided that h naught is true. What is h naught? That the mean time does not change. If we find that the p-value here is less than 0.05, that is the alpha, we end up rejecting the null hypothesis. And if the p-value is greater than or equal to alpha, we can't reject the null hypothesis. So for example, if it's 0.03, then if your p-value comes up to be 0.03, we end up rejecting the null hypothesis. There is definitely more time being spent on the yellow website. And In the case of it, if it is p-value comes to be 0. 0.5, we can't reject it. So when you make a decision, you've done these two steps. The first two steps, you've determined the null hypothesis, an alternative hypothesis. You know what the size of type 1 error is that can be tolerated, and then you can either have this p-value differentiation comparison between the alpha p-value comparison, or you can have the rejection region approach. In a rejection region approach, you have a cutoff value, a threshold value that you actually decide for that particular question. And if our test statistic falls within that region, we have enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis. So everything that's colored in orange here is the rejection region. The set of values between that is where the H0 can be rejected. So here it's a two-tailed test. We have two rejection regions. Here it's a left tail test. You have one on this side. So I'm assuming you guys know how normal distribution is made, and if I've taken a sample of 2 or if I've taken a sample of 100, we end up making these plots based on. I mean, this is just a brief on understanding how these normal distributions are made, and once you have that, you can then go about finding what are the critical regions, critical values beyond which you have the rejection regions. There are other tests as well that we can actually decide. So what we did earlier was the Z test based on our question here, but we can actually also do other tests based on the data. So if your data is continuous, you have the option of comparing their sample means, or you can also compare the variances of the two samples. If you're comparing variances, you have a different test statistic to find out, that is the F test. If you are comparing the means, you have again two options. That is, if the sample size is less than 30, you can have an independent t-test, or if the sample is greater than 30, you can do a z-test. This is a norm that is usually done. If your data is qualitative, that is you have discrete data, you can actually do a chi-square test that is based on the observed compared with the expected. So if I were to show you a quick example on how we are actually finding out the formulas, t-test is usually done when you have a sample size less than 30. It's a very small sample. You are going to be having a null hypothesis that says the mean of the two samples are same. So that means x1 is equal to x2. If that is h naught, then ha is going to be at the mean of these two samples are different. That's why we have t being calculated as x1 minus x2, and then you have the standard deviation being calculated. The F statistic or the F test is done where your null hypothesis says that there is no significant difference between these two variances. It's similar to mean, right? There it was mean, here it is variance. Now there is a chi-square test where we again state as our status quo that there is no significant difference between the observed and the expected values. So again here O stands for observed and E stands for expected. This is how you would definitely do, but you have to. Since we are short on time, I won't be able to explain each one of these. But this flowchart is usually a go-to for me, where I have to decide this. And 30 is one thing that I still remember learning it. Like I learned it 2 years ago, but this is something I still go to. So do check it out. Learn more about this on. You can find it on Khan Academy or on Plural site. There's also a lot of things on analytics Vidya. I was not able to mention that, but they've done something based on coronavirus as well. So do check that out. And in case of any questions regarding the things I've mentioned here, or otherwise, do stay in touch with me on any of these social media platforms. So thank you for being a part of this. Keep supporting with Mysuru and join us for more talks. Thank you, Usha, once again. Thank you, everyone. Bye.